Hey people, welcome to Heeltoe's Corner Club podcast. And I am back for another episode here. We're going to try to open up the floodgates of podcast material for you guys again. It's been, once again, a challenge. You know, maybe if you've heard podcasts for a while that are on again, off again, it's a really difficult thing to keep up. But, you know what, I really have so much to share with you guys that I want to make sure that I stay on the ball and get this stuff out for you. So today I want to bring up a previous podcast video that I did, talking about that springs settling was a myth. And I got a little bit of fire back on that one from a user who, let's see, I will pull up the comments so that we can know exactly what this user said. But yeah, I post up stuff sometimes that isn't, necessarily conventional, thinking or conventional wisdom. And it's because there's a lot of myths in this industry. And there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of misunderstandings. There's just so many different aspects to working on cars and upgrading cars that it becomes hard to pull apart, like what's fact and what's fiction and what's truth and what's not truth. And one of the things I've come to understand over time is that facts add up to oftentimes the truth, but the truth doesn't always depend on all those facts aligning. A lot of things individually can be true facts or true information, but the culmination of adding a bunch of facts together doesn't really net like what actually happens in real life. So, and this is a perfect example. The podcast I'm talking about was number 28, settling a myth about lowering springs. And I got a message from somebody here that says, incorrect. King springs do settle, had plenty of sets, and they definitely state after 1,000 to 2,000 kilometers, at least a 10 millimeter settling. And I went to look at the King Springs website, which I'd never heard of King Springs before, but it's a European brand. So I went to the King website, King Springs, and found that they are saying more than 3/8 of an inch of settling is not normal. And I told the person I couldn't imagine why they would settle that much. It sounds like a cheap spring to me. Their warranty allows for 10 millimeters of sag, which to me feels like a lot. 10 millimeters is quite a chunk. It's like a centimeter, and it's almost a half an inch. If I bought a set of springs and 2 months after getting them, or 6 months, or even 2 years after getting them, my car was even a 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch lower, that's just not an indicator to me that that was a good quality spring. Even after 2 weeks, if it settled that much, I'm like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I stuck to my guns and I thought, honestly, I don't think that this is a good data point. If we look at King Springs, something that, I'm sure I'm not alone. I am not the only one that hasn't heard of them, but it seems like a lower quality spring if they're saying that kind of lowering or sagging was natural. So, a month later, something like that, somebody else went into that video and made this comment. I run plenty of springs from H&R, and they always settle and lower a bit after installing over the next few weeks. There are actually a few companies that go into detail as to why they settle. You can call H&R right now, and they will explain that the springs will settle. It won't be a half an inch or more, but they will settle and lower a bit more after driving for a few weeks. If you want to argue this, that is fine, but I'd like to see cited sources or actual data to back up your claim instead of just making a claim. Well, yeah, so a little bit of a shot fired on that one, and the guy, he's egging me on, right? Like, contact H&R, see what they say. And my initial response was this, and it's a little bit of a wordy response, so Just sit tight, but I think it was a good reply. So in response to that, I wrote, I've got nearly 3 decades of professional experience, and that is firm enough ground to stand on across from you. I have not seen it. People say a lot of theoretically are not incorrect. But there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge can tell you all the reasons why something could happen, or even that it should happen. Practical experience provides the truth in the face of facts. Bushings compress, spring seats compress, springs don't settle. I'm expecting that spring manufacturers, if they have not designed springs specifically so that they would intentionally sag to a calibrated height, which sounds absurd to me, would be making statements about settling to cover their asses against people who's griping about finite lowering specs. Nobody could be held to a specific standard of number with something like springs where people have varying experiences over time. So, just a bit of an aside, I want to explain a couple of points that I've got in there. Like, if they have not designed springs specifically so that they would intentionally sag to a calibrated height. So, what this means is that a spring manufacturer, and we'll just pick on H&R since he brought it up, if they say a spring lowers 1 inch, but they know that it's going to sag a certain amount over time, and they made it that way, then they would actually make it so that the spring lowered the car maybe 3/4 of an inch initially, knowing that it would sag 1/4 of an inch over time. How do they know how much it's going to sag over time? There's variances in vehicle weight. There's variances in the way people drive their cars. There's differences in the dampers that they use that may add more or less load onto the spring if they're not able to damp oscillations very well. I mean, these are all just a few different ideas that could impact how much a spring is going to compress over time if it's going to sag to a calibrated amount. But I mean, how could H&R predict that? How could they predict that a right and a left spring would sag the same amount, and so then you would end up with a level ride height? It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, the spring manufacturer's got to make the spring to lower the car a certain amount, and it really shouldn't be changing after that, because otherwise, how would they handle quality control? And the next comment goes even further. And, just saying, like, they're calling this settling something that can happen to cover their asses against people that gripe about lowering specs. And, that's not everybody, but I've had plenty of customers who go to really fine detail about how much the spring is going to lower their car. And if it's off by a 1/16 of an inch, they're not happy. And I've seen this more with really specialty cars like BMWs, S2000s, NSXs. These cars the owners are particular about the cars because the cars are very finely tuned instruments, and it actually does make a difference. 1/8 of an inch on one corner or the other can have a visual and a handling difference that they don't want to have. So that being said, like, the only reason why I think a manufacturer could say that an amount of settling was normal would be because they were like trying to cover their bases so that people wouldn't complain, and they could say, well, we are we're allowing 1/4 of an inch of settling, so, your 1/16 of an inch doesn't constitute a warranty claim. And I don't think people would be very happy with that at all. So continuing on with my reply. All that said, I emailed my rep at H&R for official comment since I'm a direct dealer. That's right. If you didn't know, Heeltoe Automotive is a direct dealer with H&R Springs. We have a rep there that we can contact for technical information and data and all of this kind of stuff. We don't always source our parts directly from H&R. They don't always have inventory, but we have industry contacts direct with manufacturers specifically for reasons like this, so that we can help cut through a lot of the hearsay and just the internet mumbo jumbo and go straight to the source. So I got called out. Contact H&R and see what they say. Well, I did, right? And I'm waiting for their reply. And viewing their website, I found H&R Springs are high quality products. They will not set or sag. And I referenced a link for the person. Also, in their technical resources link, the words set or settle do not appear even once. not even in their technical documents and their warranty statement. So I couldn't really find any evidence on H&R's website what this guy said was true. Maybe it's only true if you contact them. So I contacted them and I was waiting for a reply. But I went a little bit of a step further and I said, hey, for good measure, I also looked on iBox's website and found this advice. Before you measure the after dimension, drive your car hard for 10 miles to let the springs, spacers, etc. seat properly. This statement is far better in alignment with my claim and then with your idea that 2 weeks later it should change up to 1/2 inch. And in the original video, and I will definitely refer to it here, I did say, like, the reason why there's a perception that springs settle is because after you first put them in the car and you put the car on the ground, what does everybody do? They get back and they take a look. They take a step back and they go, oh yeah, and then they start measuring the wheel gap and they're like, oh, well, it'll settle a little bit more. Okay, cool, right? Get in the car, pull it out of your service area, your garage, your driveway or whatever, and then you come back in and measure it, and sure enough, it's settled a little bit. It's lower, right? The perception is that settling isn't a myth. The car did settle, and it's going to continue to do that for a short period of time, so I should wait to go get my alignment. And that's where the myth is. The myth is that it's going to continue lowering after that. And there's a misunderstanding about how that lowering happened in the first place. The tires relaxing against the ground, the bushings relaxing into their neutral state. All of this is the reason why the car is lower after you test drive it versus when you first put it on the ground. It won't lower anymore after that, right? And IBOC is supporting this here. And they say, well, drive it hard for 10 miles. You literally can pull the car out of the service area and right back in again. I mean, all you have to do is drive it 20 feet. The tires and everything will relax and settle in the way it's supposed to be. But yeah, like you do suspension work, you're going to go out and test drive the car, drive it, make sure everything's seated properly, which is not the same as settling. And then you can measure your final height, right? That's the height that the spring is supposed to net you. My last comment to that response was, can you imagine needing to break in race springs to get their final height before corner weighting? If I bought springs advertised to lower 1.5 inches as stated by the manufacturer, and a few weeks in they dropped to 1.75 inches lower, that would be pretty annoying. Some customers would not like that at all. These things do matter. And so we can't just say that springs settle because my buddy said, or it happened to me, or the manufacturer claimed it, or whatever. The manufacturer could claim it, but they could be selling cheap springs and have an unreliable warranty, right? Your buddy, who knows if they did it right, wrong, or whatever. Or maybe they had the perceptual impact that I was just explaining earlier. Well, I let it go, and somewhere around a week later, H&R did get back to me. I got a reply back from Caleb over there, and my question to them directly was, does H&R have an official stance on the topic of spring settling? So the response to me was, all H&R springs are manufactured with a block height memory, meaning they are broken in from the factory. Once installed and the vehicle has rolled, there should be no settling of the springs themselves. This typically comes from any bushings neutralizing with the suspension. Hope this helps. Let me know if you have any further questions. So there we go. Perfectly verified by the manufacturer. And I didn't even need to talk to him to make my original podcast in the first place. The spring settling is a myth. It's not something that you should be concerned about. As soon as you put the springs in, test drive, make sure the car is rolling safe. There's no clunking, loose stuff, parts flying around, whatever, and then get your alignment. There's no reason to wait a week, a day, or any amount of time for springs to settle. If you do so, all you're doing is just putting a little extra wear on your tires until you get that alignment done. So there you have it. That's my response to this. I think this is probably the first time that I've made a podcast responding to somebody's comment in another podcast. So I have to say that one of the coolest things about doing this podcast is reading some of the comments. I get a lot of support from people, and then I get some detractors too. In particular, my lightweight crank pulley one pulls probably the most inflammatory stuff. But anyway, all that being said, response done. Springs don't settle. It's confirmed. And I'm sticking with it. Thank you very much for listening. And I promise I will be doing more content going forward. And, we're going to share more information. And honestly, if you like this podcast, go ahead and leave a comment below. Let me know what you've been wondering about, and I can talk about it. And if I don't really know the answer, I'll research. I have the sources. I can get it done. That's what I do. That's my job. That's Heeltoe in your corner. Hoping that you have a fantastic day. Thank you again for listening.